Darkcast Network. The light shines brightest on our indie podcasts.
Hey, this is Autumn, host of Autumn's Oddities on Darkcast Network. On my show, I talk about murder, cryptids, and ghosts. So you could probably guess that my tastes are a bit on the darker side. So when I shop for unique novelties and gifts, I like to keep an eye out for something with a little bit of, something out of the ordinary. That's why I shop at Batwings and Butterflies. Batwings and Butterflies is an independent, creator-owned and operated boutique featuring handmade knit creations that run the gamut of the wild and dark side. Here you'll find knit toys and stuffies like little baby Baphomets and giant tarantulas, household knits like blankets, doilies, and water pipe cozies, and much more. Every item is an original work of art, handmade with love by a talented artisan. Order your one-of-a-kind creations today. Find Batwings and Butterflies on Instagram at Batwings and Butterflies. My favorite product is definitely the little baby Baphomet. Oh, look at him. Just go online and look. It looks like he's hailing himself. He's the perfect little demon baby to cuddle with on a cold night while you're listening to podcasts on the Darkcast Network. Go get yours today.
Addiction, noun. The fact or condition of being addicted to a particular substance, thing, or activity. An overwhelming compulsion. What makes us fall into the world of drugs and addiction? Why can some of us dabble in the illicit and walk away unscathed, while others of us travel downward into the deep spiral of addiction? Humans have always had a fascination with the allure of getting high. Our obsession with drugs isn't a new societal epidemic, but one that has its roots dating back to the ancient days of mankind. While the drugs we utilize to try and get high nowadays may have shifted, our fascination with the darkened path of addiction has not changed. If you or a loved one have been struggling with addiction, or have in the past, and would like to share your story, please feel free to reach out to me via social media or through email at juryroompodcast@gmail.com. This is Addicted, a Jury Room production. Coming soon to wherever you listen to this podcast.
Hey there, this is my disclaimer. Beyond the Rainbow is a true crime podcast. It's not suitable for children, and it might not be suitable for some adults either. I have a filthy mouth. I had to get it. It was on sale, and it matched my filthy mind perfectly. Don't say I didn't warn ya. Hey there, Rainbow Warriors. You're listening to Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBTQ+. I'm your host, CJ, and co-founder of Darkcast Network, where you can find 20 of the most awesome shows ever. We have a Darkcast website, and I'll put the link in the show notes. On the website are little introductory videos of each show on the network. This way you can read up on them and decide who to listen to first. Beyond the Rainbow is a one-woman researched, written, recorded, and edited production. Why? Because I'm a badass! And should you feel so compelled to be a badass too, I have a Buy Me a Coffee /Rainbow Crimes account. Because coffee is my liquid addiction. So please help me support my habit. I'm on all the social medias, which technically makes me a social butterfly of sorts, I guess. Find me on Facebook at Beyond the Rainbow, and just about everywhere else as Rainbow Crimes. Plus, be sure to check out my website at beyondtherainbowpodcast.com. Hey there, Rainbow Warriors. This episode is part 2 of Voices of Darkcast, Victims of Hate. But in case you missed the first part and you plan on going back to listen, or you're just going backwards on my episodes, here's the skinny. I was on the Jury Room podcast Aftermath episode about the Columbine Massacre. My friend, the host Kevin, asked me a question that really stuck with me. He asked if things were better now in the way of violence for the LGBTQ community as opposed to before, which I took to mean prior to 2010 maybe. I told him sadly I didn't think so. And where I think Kevin was going with this question is that it seems people are more accepting of the LGBTQ plus these days, so there should be less crimes. And there really should be. So again, with the help of some of my Darkcast Network podcasting friends, we are going to present to you a collection of LGBTQ true crime stories. The cases told in the episodes are fairly recent, within the last 3 years, and there is an abundance of them. We're only covering about 20 of them. There's not a whole lot of information on many of them, but they're crimes and victims we still need to be aware of. The issue of hate and marginalized people is global, so our stories will span the world. Without further ado, here are the voices of Darkcast, victims of hate.
My name's Charles, and I'm one of the co-hosts of California True Crime. We're a podcast that deals with true crime cases up and down California, both historical and contemporary, highlighting some of the lesser-known true crime cases around the state. In Belgium last year, a group of teenagers labeling themselves as pedo hunters murdered a 42-year-old gay man named David Profliet. A pedo is probably what you think it is, a pedophile. Like far too many people, the teenage gang was under the assumption all gay men must be pedophiles. The goal of the gang is to lure gay men into a park, beat them, and then rob them. This isn't a new concept. Gay men have been considered an easy mark for a very long time. The teenage gang members range in age from 15 to 19 years old. The teens would create profiles on a gay dating app to entice men. It's unclear if the pictures posted on the app were of teenagers or of someone older. On Saturday, March 6th, 2021, a 16-year-old boy from the gang Pedo Hunters contacted David on the gay app. Again, it's unclear if the picture was of himself or someone who looked more like an adult. Most of the apps have regulations about being 18 years or older to join, and many of these days will verify ages, so they don't get into any trouble legally. Regardless, David agreed to meet the guy who contacted him. They were to meet in a park near some railroad tracks. 3 teenagers would show up at the park and demand David's wallet. David refused and was beaten, kicked, and stabbed by the teens. He would end up bleeding out from a stab wound in his thigh that severed an artery. Hours later, a passerby in the park would stumble upon David's body and call authorities. The 3 teens were identified and arrested, along with 8 other teens that were found to be luring gay men into the park to rob and beat. The later 8 would be released as they were not suspected of having anything to do with David's murder. Prosecutors are now trying to decide if the murder of David was an accident or premeditated since a knife was brought to the incident. The 3 teens continue to be held in a Belgium jail until they go to trial. Rest in power, David.
I'm Angelina from Murder News, the weekly podcast that also serves as a weekly meeting for our very own true crime cult. But not to worry, ours is the cult with all of the flower crowns and none of the flavor aid. Join us every Friday if you'd love nothing more than a virtual hang with all of your spooky friends where we chat about the subject that brought us all together, murder. With just enough chit-chat and a zero-tolerance policy for sensationalizing serial killers or victim blaming, my bewitching BFF, Aurora, and I weave you through a tale from true crime history in each episode. Check out Murder News wherever you get your podcasts. 2021 was the highest year to date for the reported murders of trans people. Globally, 375 trans people were reportedly murdered. Those stats were updated on November 11th, 2021. At that point, we still had a month and 3 weeks of the year left to go. In the U.S., as of early December, there were already 53 murders of trans people that had been reported. This does not include the murders that were reported as suicides by the police. Nor does it include any missing trans person that might have been killed and their body had not been recovered, or any trans people that may have been misgendered. She was loud, she was happy, she was fun. She was Jenny DeLeon, a 25-year-old Latinx trans woman who lived in Florida. If you were having a sad moment, she would say or do something silly to turn your frown upside down. This is just who Jenny was. She didn't believe in negativity. There was just no place for it in her world. Jenny was found a victim of homicide on November 2nd, 2021, outside a home near 9th Street North and Fairbanks Avenue in Sulphur Springs, Florida, near Tampa Bay. Jenny was assigned male at birth in Puerto Rico, but had grown up and lived most of her life in town and country Florida. She had recently moved to Tampa to get a fresh start as Jenny. She was living a transient lifestyle and provided for herself by survival-type jobs, including selling drugs and her body. No one has been arrested as a suspect yet in Jenny's case. In fact, there are no media reports as to what the method of Jenny's death was. Police seem to be holding much information close to their vests. Should anyone have any information about Jenny's death or any suspicious circumstances, in the early morning hours of November 2nd, 2021, they're being asked to call Crime Stoppers of Tampa Bay at 1-800-873-8477 and reference case number 21-463329. Rest in power, Jenny.
Hello, I'm Jackie Moranti, and my podcast is called Cause of Death. This show discusses infectious disease, the causes, the effects, the socioeconomics, the politics, the history, and what we as citizens do with it all. If you haven't listened to my podcast, you should. Just over the border from El Paso, Texas, is the city of Juarez in Mexico. Juarez has a reputation for being a very violent place. The married couple of Yulisa Ramirez and Naomi Medina Martinez, both 28 years old, were originally from Juarez, but were now living in El Paso. The couple had taken their 3 young children to Juarez with them to visit family. One of the nights they were there, the couple left their children with their family members and went to the home of a couple, a man, 24 years old, and a woman, 25 years old, in the community of San Isidro, east of Juarez. On January 16, 2022, the women's dismembered body parts were found in black trash bags dispersed along the Juarez-El Porvenir highway. The police suspect that the women were tortured before they were shot and cut apart, shoved into trash bags, and tossed out on the side of the highway. Police arrested the couple, who have been identified only as David R. and Jacqueline Isla C.R. After an intensive search of the couple's home, police found enough evidence to charge them with aggravated femicide. It is believed the women were murdered because of their sexual identity. Court proceedings are still underway for the couple. Rest in power, Yulisa and Naomi.
Hey, this is Mike of Brew Crime Podcast. We are a true crime and indie or craft beer podcast. We take a theme twice a month. We each do a case, me and JT, and we pair it with a beer. We mix in a little bit of comedy whenever it's pertinent, but we never make fun of victims or their families, only perpetrators. So we hope you'll check our show out, and let's get into this. Once a bully, always a bully. 74-year-old Robert Faring has been picking on the LGBTQ plus community for years in his home in Long Island, New York. For the past 9 years at least, Robert has been sending threatening letters to the LGBTQ plus businesses and organizations. He threatens violence, including the use of firearms and bombs. Over 60 letters from Robert have been recovered. One such letter, postmarked June 24th, 2019, was addressed to the Pachugue Chamber of Commerce. The letter read, If you are still planning to have the LGBT thing at Alive at 5, plan on having a large police presence and numerous ambulances available. A much more hostile letter was postmarked May 20th, 2021, and was sent to the organizers of the LGBTQ plus Pride in New York City. Robert likes to use all capital letters in his letters, as if he were screaming every word. Roberts were, quote, "As you fucking scumbags prepared to waltz your fruity, freaky faggot asses down the NY parade lanes, we warn you that there will be radio-controlled devices placed at numerous strategic places and firepower aimed at you from other strategic places. We've had enough. This will make the 2016 Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting look like a cakewalk," end quote. The letter had been stamped with a rubber stamp that said confidential in blue ink with another stamp of exclamation points in red ink. A letter postmarked June 9th, 2021 was sent to the CEO of an LGBTQ plus nonprofit organization in Sag Harbor, New York. The letter read, "Better be ready to meet your end if you show up at Eisenhower on Sunday. It's a great place to unload a high-powered rifle bullet from a distance that can go right through your gay face. You were warned. Pay the price if you want. They can call you a martyr. We can call you gone." Robert's letters were very similar to these, using homophobic slurs threatening death and injury to LGBTQ+. He was arrested over and over again. In December 2021, he again was picked up by police for stealing 20 rainbow flags. It would seem this old fart with a hateful heart doesn't learn by being arrested. He really needs to be incarcerated for a long amount of time. His threats of hate have many LGBTQ+ people living in fear, while Robert is arrested and released over and over again. He isn't taken seriously by law enforcement, and especially the court system. They feel he's made threats for 9 years. He's not going to do anything. He's not going to do anything until he does, and people will get hurt or worse. The man has a buttload of charges against him. Let's hope soon he will have a trial where justice will prevail and he will have to actually do time. He's out on a $100,000 bail bond for now. If found guilty and sentenced, it will be for 5 years. That's not enough, but fingers crossed.
My name is Jessica, and I'm a co-host of California True Crime, a podcast about true crime and history in California. It's unjustly ironic when someone who invests their time and energy saving lives is brutally murdered. Where's the karma in that? But that's just what happened to a 29-year-old gay paramedic in Latvia. Norman Skinzulis was home with his roommate, who was also gay, the night of April 28, 2021. His roommate was in bed asleep when in the early morning hours, Norman's heard something at the door. He went to go see what it was. Upon opening his door, Norman's was doused with an accelerant believed to be gasoline and lit on fire. Norman's roommate heard a horrible scream come from the hallway of their home. He got up and ran out to the common room, horrified to see Norman's body fully engulfed in flames just outside their door. The roommate tried to grab Norman's to roll him on the ground, but he was too burned. Norman's died from being burnt alive. 85% of his body was burnt beyond recognition. His roommate had severe burns to his hands, but he would survive. The alleged attacker was a homophobic neighbor man. Police called Norman's a pile of burnt clothing and quickly decided he completed suicide by setting himself on fire, in spite of allegations that the attacker was the neighbor. Norman's had received death threats about being gay before, but in a different city he had lived in, which was a big part of the reason he had moved to another city. He was hoping to be able to live his truth without harassment this time. Protesters gathered and cried injustice for Norman's. The Prime Minister even called his death heinous and said the crime needs to be thoroughly investigated. With the heat from the protesters and the Prime Minister, the hand of the police is being forced to open, and Norman's case has been classified as an active homicide case. Rest in power, Normans.
Hello everyone, my name is Lance, and together with my wife Julie, we do Gone But Never Forgotten, a true crime podcast covering mostly Canadian stories of missing people, solved and unsolved murders, and more. You can check us out wherever you take in your podcasts. One night in June 2019, two women were out on a date together. It wasn't their first date with each other. They had been on several dates together and really seemed to like each other. 28-year-old Uruguayan doctor Melania Haymonat boarded a double-decker bus in London with her date, Chris. They were on their way home after having a really lovely time together. Melania and Chris were holding hands on the top of the bus when they leaned in for a quick kiss. The kiss was observed by 4 teenage boys aged 15 to 18. Within seconds, the boys moved in on them and began provoking them, using derogatory lesbian terms, describing lesbian sexual positions, and taunting them, telling them to kiss again. When the women refused to kiss on demand, the boys started to get more verbally abusive. Melania tried to joke with the boys, trying to distract them with humor and relate to them, but the boys continued their verbal attack on the women. Chris stood up and walked a few steps towards the boys to confront the situation, to defend her and Melania's honor. For her efforts, though, she was physically attacked by the boys. They began punching her in the face. When Melania attempted to stop the boys and pull Chris out of harm's way, she too was jumped by the 4 who pummeled her face and broke her nose. The boys stole Melania's phone and purse before quickly exiting the bus at the next stop and running off. Thanks to London having CCTV footage just about everywhere, the boys were found and arrested. One of the boys ended up being released because while he was guilty by association, he was the only one affected by Melania's attempt to relate to him. He was the only boy who backed off of the women. The other 3 boys did minimal time for robbery and public disorder. Melania was asked in court why she was being so friendly to them. She had wondered that herself and realized that her coping mechanism was to try and gain empathy from them. She told the court she was a Latina female who was from a place she was used to being harassed. If she can get her attacker to empathize with her, they most likely won't harm her. In the end, she only got through to that one boy. Melania and Chris's relationship dissolved after that, and Melania moved back to Barcelona soon after the trial. Too many bad memories for her in London.
This is Aurora from Murder Murder News podcast. Each week on Murder Murder News, we detangle an event from this week in true crime history. We like to focus on crimes affecting marginalized communities through the lens of the victim. Tune in every Friday as we do a deep dive into another unsolved murder or missing person case that even the biggest true crime fans might be unfamiliar with. But let's get back to our story. 22-year-old Maria Gaglione was murdered on September 11th, 2020 by a man who sits in jail awaiting his trial. The man? He is Maria's 25-year-old brother, Michele Antonio Gaglione. He's being charged with intentional homicide aggravated by feudal motives. Maria's family had been very upset with her since she had started dating a young trans man named Ciro Magliore. The young couple had plans to marry, which infuriated Maria's family. On September 11th, the couple were riding along on Ciro's motorcycle, Maria on the back of the motorcycle holding onto Ciro's waist. A motorcycle rode by Maria's brother Michele Antonio suddenly appeared behind them. The brother gained speed and was side by side with Maria. He extended his leg and made contact with Ciro's motorcycle, causing Ciro to lose control of his 2-wheeled vehicle and crash. Maria was killed instantly, and Ciro sustained some major injuries. When authorities arrived at the scene, they found Michele Antonio beating an already unconscious Ciro about the face and his head. Prior to this, Maria had been missing from the family for about 2 weeks after a heated argument about her marrying Ciro. When the brother saw Maria and Chiedo on the motorcycle, he said he wanted to make them stop because he wanted to talk to his sister and try to get her to come back home. His parents, most likely afraid of losing yet another child, backed their son and said Maria's death was just a simple accident. No one was supposed to die. Chiedo's injuries were a broken arm and contusions everywhere. This accident alerted police to Chiedo, who was actually wanted for a 2018 charge of selling drugs in a park. He is currently serving time for this in a woman's prison, but he was escorted by police to attend Maria's funeral. Chiedo claimed it was Maria's love that got him clean and gave him the will to be a better person. Maria's brother is waiting to see if he'll be charged officially for his sister's death. Rest in power, Maria.
Hey there, Rainbow Warriors. My name is Paige, and I'm the host of Reverie True Crime, and I'm the co-founder of Darkcast Network with your fantastic host, CJ. On Reverie True Crime, I tell stories of true crime, of course, disappearances, mysteries, as well as conversations with people in that realm of podcasting, victims, and many other people and topics as well. I'm especially proud of the Darkcast Network and the kick-ass shows that have partnered with us. Definitely go to darkcast.wixsite.com/indie. That's darkcast.wixsite.com/indie and find great shows with a dark side to binge. Without further ado, I will get into today's story. A 60-year-old gay resident of Decatur, Illinois, had a violent incident occur at his home on February 17, 2022. He was in another room of his house when he heard a glass shatter and someone breaking into his home. He immediately got onto his cell phone and dialed 911. Police arrived at the residence but found all of the doors locked. They were about to leave when they heard screams coming from inside the home. The officers broke down a door to the home and drew their weapons. 2 men were inside and both were soaked in blood. The victim was laying on the floor with cuts all over his face and some on his body. He was soaked in his own blood but still alive. The other man was the victim's 19-year-old neighbor, who also had a good amount of blood on his person, and the blood wasn't his. The gay resident said that he had been sleeping when he heard the glass break, and he saw 19-year-old Ethan Dickerson entering his home. The teenager had a pipe wrench with him, and he started to hit the homeowner in his face, head, and body with the wrench, all while yelling at him, quote, "You're gay, you're evil, and I'm going to kill you." At one point, Ethan forced the 60-year-old into a chair and duct taped him. But the man was able to free himself and began wrestling the pipe wrench away from Ethan. The younger man was winning. He got the wrench. And on top of the gay man, Ethan held the wrench across his throat, choking him, which was precisely the time the police showed up as the homeowner screamed for help. The victim was taken to the hospital, and Ethan Dickerson was arrested and is currently being held on a $1 million bond. Unicorn Justice is looking really good so far.
Hello everyone, my name is Julie, and together with my husband Lance, we do Gone But Never Forgotten, a true crime podcast covering mostly Canadian stories of missing people, solved and unsolved murders, and more. You can check us out wherever you take in your podcasts. On Transgender Day of Remembrance in November 2020, a 22-year-old black trans woman named Asia Janae Foster was found dead in Houston, Texas. Asia was the 38th trans or non-conforming person to lose their life that year due to violence. An unidentified man found her body on Skyline Road and reported his discovery to the police. When police arrived on the scene, they found Asia deceased. A search of the area where Asia's body was found turned up some shell casings, though police believed she was killed elsewhere and her body was just dumped on Skyline Road. A medical examiner's report showed Asia died from multiple gunshot wounds. Asia had left for a date the night prior to her body being found. Family and friends surmise it was someone she must have known at least a little, someone she had been talking to. This is because Asia would always take her car to meet up with someone if she didn't know them very well. This time, she had left her car at home. Family and friends also believe Asia's murder was transphobic, someone having an issue with Asia living her truth. Rest in power, Asia.
Hello, my name is Sean, and I'm a co-host of California True Crime. We are a true crime podcast that focuses on crimes that have happened in California, and we try to give you some history of the area that we're covering. I also have another podcast called The History of Malls. I pick a mall and talk about it, and also give you some history on a department store that was in that mall. First of all, this guy is bad news. His list of felonies are a mile long. There's first-degree murder, felony murder, assault with intent to murder, assault with intent to rob while armed, and 4 felony firearm counts. This guy is 26-year-old Demetrius Nelson. He also uses the alias Lamont de Shields. As Lamont, he had other crimes added to his rap sheet. Demetrius was finally apprehended and taken into custody, but not before serving Detroit's LGBTQ plus community a reign of terror. Demetrius used Grindr to set up a date with 2 different gay men at the same time. One of those men was 31-year-old minister Brian Anderson, and the other man was 26-year-old Malcolm Drake. On July 6, 2019, around 4 a.m., Demetrius met up with his Grindr conquests. Brian was the driver of a black Ford Eagle. Malcolm was Brian's passenger. When they drove to pick up Demetrius, he got into the back seat. Brian drove a little ways and got onto the I-94 highway. After a few minutes in the car, Demetrius pulled a 9mm handgun from his waistband of his pants and shot Brian in the back of his head. Demetrius then turned the gun on Malcolm's head and shot him. After this, the car crashed over the guardrail. Brian was pronounced dead at the scene. Malcolm was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Demetrius was treated for his injuries at the scene and taken into police custody, since there weren't any other suspects that could have shot both Brian and Malcolm at such close range. Demetrius went to trial and was found guilty of second-degree murder for killing Brian. He received a minimum of 40 years and a maximum of 60 years. He was found guilty of armed robbery and received a minimum of 20 years and a maximum of 30 years. He was also found guilty of 2 counts of felony weapons charges and received an extra 4 years for that. He didn't appear to have been charged for the attempted murder of Malcolm. Even so, Demetrius, a career criminal who attacked 2 gay men thinking they would be an easy mark, will not be eligible for parole until 2061 at the very earliest. This would make Demetrius at least 68 years old for his next chance to be free. His maximum time served will be when he is 88 years old in 2081. Rest in power, Brian.
Hey guys, my name is Sarai and I host a casual spooky podcast called Freaky as Fuck. You can find me on your favorite podcast listening app by searching Freaky AF, and there I will be. I'm here today to talk about Zamien Alaman. The 15-year-old boy was doing the chores his mom asked him to do while she was at work on January 30th, 2022 in Houston, Texas. One of the chores was taking out the trash to the apartment complex dumpster on the 6400 block of Dunlap Street. He tied the bag off and walked the bag to the alcove the dumpster was housed in. After he pitched the bag, there were 2 adult men who started to call him homophobic slurs. The boy was Zamien Alaman, and he was scared. Zamien didn't even identify as LGBTQ+. He just liked dyeing his hair different colors. On this particular day, his hair happened to be dyed pink. But why did it even matter to these men? How did it really affect them?
The answer is it didn't. It wasn't their business how Zamian chose to wear his hair or what color he wanted it. After he tossed the bag, Zamian ran from the men. The men followed him to his apartment. As Zamian tried to close the door behind him and lock it, the men pushed their way into his apartment, still yelling the homophobic slurs at him. The men cornered Zamian inside his apartment and stabbed him 12 times, 7 times in his neck and 5 times in his chest. Zamian was able to call his mother as he was being cornered by the men. She immediately left work and went home. She tried to administer CPR in him, but she was too late. Zamian was dead. There were some witnesses at the apartment complex who heard the men attack Zamian. They heard the men yelling homophobic slurs at the boy, but no one has been arrested as of yet. If you have any information regarding this crime, please call Houston PD's Homicide Division at 713-308-3600. Zamian, even if you weren't LGBTQ+, rest in power, little man.
Hi, this is Molly, half of the duo of Over the Fence True Crime Podcast. We are former neighbors that started off our friendship talking true crime over our fence and have continued on by starting this podcast and sharing our passion with the world. Butte Park in Cardiff, UK is usually a prime spot for gay hookups. 54-year-old bisexual psychiatrist Dr. Gary Jenkins had went to the park on more than one occasion to gratify his need for a male-on-male sexual encounter. Gary had been married with 2 daughters, but he was recently separated from his wife. The night of July 20th, 2021, Gary would go to Butte Park looking for a hookup for the last time. Men would normally meet each other in the park under the cover of darkness. But this night, in the early morning hours, Gary would meet at least 3 people. A 36-year-old man, a 25-year-old man, and a 17-year-old girl. According to CCTV audio, it sounded as though there may have been another man with that trio. Gary could be heard telling the people to leave him alone, as the other 3 hit and kicked him, robbed him, and called him derogatory gay slurs. The 3 were laughing and yelling. Another man in another area nearby heard the commotion. He ventured over to see Gary on the ground and 3 people kicking him. The witness said he was scared, but ran over to put himself between the attackers and Gary. Soon he was being attacked and ran off to find help. When he got back, police were already there. The entire attack on Gary lasted 15 minutes. He was transported to the University Hospital of Wales. 16 days later, Dr. Gary Jenkins would succumb to his injuries and die. 36-year-old Lee Strickland, 25-year-old Jason Edwards, and the 17-year-old girl, whose name remains unknown in media because she is a minor, were all arrested and put on trial for Gary's murder. All 3 admit to partaking in his beating, but say they did not kill him. The trial is still ongoing. Rest in power, Dr. Gary.
The Kurdish trans woman had been living in hiding for the past 5 years. Her family had turned their back on her when she was a young teenager going through gender dysphoria. She knew if her family were to see her, she would die. Her murder would be considered an honor killing. Living as LGBTQ+ in her country of Kurdistan, it was not acceptable. She was a disgrace to her family. She couldn't leave Kurdistan. Her father had confiscated her passport and other essential documents she would need to travel. 23-year-old Doski Azad had a knack for making beautiful faces. She was a makeup artist and a social media influencer. She also worked in a beauty salon, but her forte was to go do makeup for women of wedding parties. Doski also lived in fear of her relatives. She already had a number of death threats from male members of her family. Even in hiding, they could find her via a phone call or social media outlets to issue the threat. Doski would move around every so often just to keep her family from finding her. One of Doski's older brothers, who had been living in Germany for the past 8 years, had come home to hunt Doski down at the start of the new year, 2022. Her brother found her living in the borders of Kurdistan in Iraq and Duhok. When he found her, he tied her hands behind her, and he shot her dead. He then dumped her body just outside her city in a ditch. This was on January 28, 2022. 3 days later, he called another younger brother in Kurdistan and he told him where Doski's body could be found. The police were called, and they discovered Doski's remains exactly where they were told they'd be. The killer brother had left the country again to return to his home in Germany. Nothing thus far has been done. No arrests have been made. And most likely, no unicorn justice will follow. To many who live in the Middle East, honor killings are a pretty normal occurrence. Bodies that were victims of their own family members lay in hundreds of nameless graves. They're only marked by numbers. Rest in power, Doski. The past 2 episodes, the collection of Voices of Darkcast, have included about 20 short stories of hate against the LGBTQ community in a 3-year time frame. I think the appropriate answer to the question, aren't things getting better for the LGBTQ plus, would be maybe in certain ways. As far as hate and violence, no. But in terms of being accepted for who we are, yes. It seems as though many more people are accepting us, but there are so many more people harming and killing us also. And I know this sounds confusing as fuck. I think what it comes down to, we are living in a much more violent time, and attitudes towards people are hostile. Government officials in a lot of countries are trying to assert themselves as powerful. They're unzipping their flies and whipping out their dicks, trying to prove they have the bigger one. And how they're doing this is through violence. We as the people see that, and we think that must be the way, and we become violent nations, violent people. It's what I tried explaining in part 1 of the series. The way we conduct ourselves is learned behavior that trickles from the hierarchy down to the people. Will the world ever figure shit out? It's hard to say. History, even bad history, tends to repeat itself. And for some reason, we don't want to learn the lessons the first time. I'm sorry, I don't mean for this to sound so grim. But these world leaders, they just need to put it back in their pants, zip up their trousers. And if you need to play games with other people's lives, forget it. Go play with each other, and I know how that sounds. I know that I tell my Rainbow Warriors, live your truth. But honestly, I only want you to live your truth if you're safe to do so. Even I don't always live my truth because I don't feel safe where I'm at. For example, I have a rainbow heart face mask, but I opt to wear plain disposable ones when I'm out in public sometimes. And it's because of all the Trump 2024 signs that I see around here. I have to live my truth safely. There. That's what I want you to do. Live your truth safely. I love you, Rainbow Warriors. And remember, it's not a crime to live your truth. It's other people with very narrow minds that believe it is a crime. Fuck them.